Virginia's prosperity is very much tied up with the industry that has come to Virginia because of this river and has settled on this river. And you can look back through history and see that that has been true, that it was prosperous in the colonial times because you had the tobacco industry on the river going back to England. It was prosperous in the 18th and 19th century because it had the mills that could process the wheat that was coming down from the mountains and all around and make all this flour and all this iron for the rest of the world. And it is prosperous today very much because of the chemical industries which have settled, that make our rugs and our plastics and our synthetics and all the other things that we are so dependent on.
My grandfather bought it, my father farmed it, and I farmed it, and now my son farmed it. So that's 4 generations under the same family management. It was a grant from the King of England, Sir Philip Lightfoot, and it was in that family for up till around 1840. But it's one of the oldest grants. See, we're just almost the site of Jamestown here, so you can figure this land's been under production by other than Indians long in any other land in the area, probably.
The flow of settlement in Virginia, the first of the permanent English colonies in America, began with the establishment, of course, of Jamestown itself on the river, chosen, in fact, as a location for the capital town because it was on the river. And then the pattern of settlement spread through the colonial period up the James River, farms and plantations dotting the river as people spread out from Jamestown. Ultimately, this was true of the whole Tidewater region, but the James River was the first river, in fact, in which this pattern of European settlement began to develop.
We're standing at one end of about a 200-yard area, which was a settlement established in 1619 by the first governor, George Yardley, and its position is very typical of these very early 17th century communities, which were primarily engaged in producing tobacco from the nearby fields. That is, directly on the river. Here we've lost very little, so that the relationship between what we see and where the river is pretty much what it probably was in the 17th century, maybe minus about 10 feet.
There were a mixture of motives in colonization, but I think in the Virginia Company effort, in the settlement of Virginia, which after all was the work of a commercial company, it brought its settlers here and established this settlement in order to make the company profitable. And I think that was at the base of a great deal of the European expansion overseas. Virginia is a very clear example of that. What developed, I think, given the sense that this wasn't an almost unspoiled and a rich natural environment, river and land alike, they came with the attitude that their task really, and a monumental task it was in their sight, was to clear and develop the land and use the resources and really exploit the land to the fullest. That does, by the 19th century, certainly begin to create some problems. Agriculture along the river, as it was nearly everywhere else, was a great deal more intensive, put much heavier pressure on the land, and that in turn, from erosion, for example, probably put some pressures on the river as well.
Well, I don't think any farmer wants to go in and see the land erode. You know, most farmers will do everything they can to stop the land from eroding. But, you know, anytime I till a field and then I see a lot of erosion, it makes me feel bad. Well, the river is the primary source of drainage for the farm, and we have changed our farming operation in the last few years to control erosion more. And one of the big complaints these days is that farm chemicals go into the river. And by no-till farming and using grass strips, we can control the amount of runoff that goes into the river.
We have to have certain things to survive. We have to produce the food. Something has to give. Maybe we'll have to have some pollution here in order for our civilization to survive. By the same token, if we don't control it, we won't have a civilization because we won't be able to live within the environment. It's a matter of balance.
if you drive by a big paper mill or a big industrial plant along the river and you see the smoke rolling out of it and the pipes going into the river, you have to feel that they're more responsible for the pollution than we are, than the farmer is.
The lower James is still in some ways remarkably unspoiled. And the windmill, sitting here on a historic site that is accessible, that has not been so developed that you can't recover it, is a good example of the many historic locations that exist along the James River. The Jamestown site itself, the various 18th century plantation houses. There is an unusual concentration of actual historic sites that exist on the river, even in the face of the long development over several centuries, and it simply intensifies for us its historical significance.
The James River is responsible for all types of industry, from farming to cigarette tobacco plants to chemical plants, fuel docks. I've been working on the river for Lone Star Industries for the past 28 years. Our purpose is transferring material from one point to another, which is the loads are stored on the Richmond end, on this end, and are transferred to Norfolk. It's a means of transportation. And we bring empty barges back up, take loaded ones down. And it's a cheap means of transporting bulk materials from one point to another.
The development of the James as an artery of transportation and commerce, of course, dates virtually from the first settlement. It was the access route to Jamestown, and then settlement spread up the river. And then as the tobacco boom hit the colony, and that came quite early in the first 10 or 15 years at Jamestown, the river became the artery for a large transatlantic commerce that grew during the colonial period right up to the Revolution.
In the 18th century, the definition changed a little bit from just highway to power, to energy, to run mills, to process flour into wheat, which could go anywhere over the world, various other kinds of things, to turn ore into iron, to make these, not send raw materials out so much as finished material. You can draw a parallel between Virginia's growing prosperity in the 20th century and, unfortunately, pollution. As you had industrial development from the turn of the century on, and they finally got back on their feet after the Civil War, you had a lot of tobacco processing, which put certain waste in the, although they were mostly organic waste, in the water. You had chemical plants, fertilizer plants, iron manufacture that soon turned into manufacture of guns and such. You had a great deal of experimentation with chemicals that went on the river for things that eventually became essential for our society and for waging war. And it seems that all through this, they think of the river as constantly renewing itself. And they trust it. They have faith that it's going to constantly renew itself no matter what they do. As long as there weren't all that many people and that much going on or that many chemicals or anything, it was justified. But as the 20th century came along, it really was not justified anymore, and the river began to die in many places because, especially below where you had a great deal of industry, as below Richmond and below Lynchburg.
I'm a married man. I have 3 children. And my job has supported me, a wife, and 3 children. It's school my children, supported my wife, give us the things that we needed in life, the same as every other responsible married person has. We've already laid the groundwork for this. It's necessary. We do have to support ourselves. I'm a naturalist. I love nature. But I'm afraid that we have reached the point that it is necessary to keep going as we are.
We don't have no idea what's going in the river or what's hurting it. We just don't know. We just play it by ear. I mean, like I said, I don't know what's being dumped in the river every day, and nobody else really knows. And we don't know whether it's doing damage to the seafood business or what. Of course, it's not helping it, we know that much. There's chemicals and stuff going in the river. But as far as what's going in, I have no idea. Let's see. Well, I know my great-grandfather, he was in the water business. And my grandfather, my father before that. So it goes way back. I imagine it's been, ever since rescue started, I would imagine it's been some seafood been brought into this area. Listen to the old timers talk, it used to be plenty of fish. Croakers, all types of fish years ago. And I've heard them speak about the croakers. There's so many croakers in the river, they couldn't haul it. They just picked the real big ones out, throw the little ones back overboard. That's the only thing they could sell. And shad, I've heard a lot of the old timers speak about loading the boats every day. Right on down with shad.
Well, there was a lot of activity here. Your shad fishing in the spring was very much a part of the way of life of many people. And I remember a man telling me one time of seeing sturgeon piled up like cordwood on the end of that dock and getting a 3-cent stamp back for a sturgeon. When your mud in your river reached a point in which the flavor of it changed, I think your sturgeon quit coming in. You go and get a handful of that mud, now it stinks because you've got so much waste coming into it.
You have some awareness of what they're doing at the river, oddly enough, very early, because we know that in 1910, I believe it was, that the General Assembly tried to pass a law that would prevent indiscriminate polluting of the water. I don't know just what words they put it, but the bill didn't get very far because we do know that one of the representatives got up and declared that the rivers of Virginia are her God-given sewers.
I think the real legacy of the colonial period was the implanting of this strong exploitative developmental attitude, the idea that the resources were there, they were plentiful, and that the real mission of the settlers and the population was to really exploit those resources.
You've got the same trouble here that you've got in every river in the country, because this not only was your first highway, it was your first sewers. Everybody had anything you want to get rid of, you threw it in the riverbank.
The handy thing about the river running right through the main settlement in Richmond was that anything that went into the river would be hidden, would go around the bend, and they'd never see it again. So, you know, out of sight, out of mind. It's always been the great principle of the flush.
I've heard the old timers say that, and I've seen some of it myself, that when raw sewage was going in the river, it didn't hurt it half as bad as the chemicals that they put in the river today.
Among Virginia rivers, the James is the most highly stressed large system. It is entirely possible that we could have another incident like the Keepone incident develop in the James, and it could occur anywhere else in the Chesapeake Bay system, primarily because we haven't yet got our defenses built to the point that they have to be in order to prevent catastrophes.
All right, take a mark. In the past, say 20, 30 years ago, there was an axiom that was often used by many people involved in waste management that said dilution is a solution to pollution. That if you had enough water going by, you could dump anything you wanted to and it would be diluted out of existence. It just wouldn't exist. We know that's wrong. The system doesn't dilute itself. Most of the compounds that are persistent and toxic concentrate in the bottom sediments where they affect the bottom life or can affect the bottom life. And they can also leach out very slowly over time and affect the things that live in the overlying water. There's a reason to study these. There's a reason to be concerned about them in the James, because again, it is our most highly populated estuary.
There are some toxic pollutants that need to be investigated, need to be examined on a thorough scientific basis. They may be a problem in the James. I don't know. But one thing that I believe we shouldn't do is spend a lot of time and effort trying to define the universe of toxic pollutants and trying to set standards and look at these toxics in such minute levels that there's really no effect from them, because you're always going to find them.
Basically, with the state of knowledge that we have today, we don't know the magnitude of the overall pollution problem. We don't know how much, obviously, if we don't know the magnitude, we can't tell how much of the pollution problem is due to industry versus non-point source runoff versus sewage plants and so forth. And that's what we have to find out. We have to find it out immediately, because if we don't know that, there's no way in the world that you can control the situation. You can't control the sources if you don't know where the sources are.
In the last 30 years, there has been a very definite decrease in loadings to the river. All of this has been accomplished at a fairly substantial cost. Our capital expenditure has been a little over $40 million. But you can spend 20 or 30% of the money to reduce the loadings by 90%. But to get that last 10% is going to cost you many-fold what you have already expended.
There is considerable cost to waste cleanup, and it is not surprising, therefore, that that there is considerable resistance to paying the cost of cleanup, particularly when the costs haven't yet been clearly established, and particularly in some cases where the necessity for cleanup hasn't been clearly established. That's our major problem.
I got an H950 for top.
The more they build along the river, the worse it's going to make it. It's got to. If they got a drainage into the water. I mean, any factory that don't, drain off into the river would make no difference. But I think every factory I know has a certain amount of drainage in the river.
The chemical plant, it would close without the river. Like chemical, which would kill oat well. Without this river, they couldn't operate. Let me put it this way. To close this river to commercial traffic would be the same thing if you took a crowbar and tore up a rail line and the highways. It would stop it.
I think that farmers are used as a scapegoat for pollution because we're a minority of the population and we really don't have time to lobby against it and defend ourselves. The farmers are always being blamed for letting nitrogen and atrazine in particular run into the river or into the bay. And they're blaming a lot of the pollution on the farmers, and I don't think farmers are responsible for the major problems that we have in the river or the bay today.
They have a rough time of it too, just like the water. They have the ups and downs too. Of course, they have to use chemical for their crops, and that don't help us know when it drains off the crops. So it's a problem all the way around.
We can't have things like they were 200 years ago. There has to be industry. It should be regulated so it doesn't pollute or destroy. But anytime there's a change, somebody's going to dislike it.
You just have to compromise. There has to be a study of the health of the river. There has to be a concerted effort on the part of all of us involved, whether it's industry, municipalities, the governmental agencies, the media, the environmental groups. We're all going to have to get together, and we're going to have to work to solve the real and perceived problems concerning the health of the river. And you're going to have to look into things like we've been talking about.
Virginia has a wonderful opportunity to be a model for river management in this country because it does have a major river, which is a great deal of industry along it, has all the problems that any river has, and that river runs entirely within the state's boundaries. So there are no problems with different states' interests or anything like that. The federal government doesn't have to come in and tell them what to do because they're different states. It has that river. And if it can manage to solve the problems of that river and it could, then it could serve as a model for other states who have to cooperate in order to handle their rivers.
Strangers will drive up down here that have gotten lost on the road, and they'll just stop and say how beautiful it is. And then it makes Nelson and I realize that it really is beautiful. A little bit of heaven.
I think people, with all the publicity and everything on this pollution matter, and cleaning Chesapeake Bay up and everything, I think people are really realizing every little bit they can do will help.
Since DDT has been banned, that we do see many more bald eagles than we used to, hawks, sparrowhawks, and there are a lot more birds, particularly the bald eagle. We see those quite frequently along the river now.
The life that's in this river is connected to our lives and to the life in the bay and the ocean, and I mean, you can't just cut it off. And all of a sudden we're beginning to realize that it doesn't just run between the banks down here, but it runs through our own bodies.
It's a beautiful river. It's a scenic river. And then the changes of the seasons and the year, from the fall to the, it's got beautiful banks from here up, especially where your banks right. And in the fall, it's beautiful.
Well, it's probably the most historic river in this state, probably on the East Coast. History is an intangible. It means different things to different people. You can't put a fixed value on history. That's all in the eyes of the beholder.
For all of the problems that we now know we face with a river like the James, problems of pollution and so forth, it still remains a magnificent river.
What we need to realize is that this is really our river, that it doesn't belong just to the people on its banks or the industries or the government, but to every single person whose life is touched by it in some way. One of the lessons history teaches us is that we really cannot take the river for granted. We have to know it, and most of all, we have to speak for it. But it really isn't easy to keep a river alive today. It takes experts. It takes scientists, lawyers, government officials. Most of all, though, it takes informed people like you and like me who speak out as persons or in groups like the Lower James River Association, and keep reminding these officials how crucial it is that we have a healthy river. And I really cannot think of a better investment for the future than to leave our children's children a living river, one that they too can enjoy.